The lake looked harmless that afternoon, almost inviting. In rural Michigan, Lake Hawthorne stretched wide and flat under a pale blue sky, the water so still it mirrored the drifting clouds above. It was the kind of quiet that made people believe nothing bad could happen. Not today, not here. Mark Reynolds had believed that too. He adjusted his baseball cap and smiled as the small aluminum fishing boat glided farther from shore. The old motor hummed steadily, cutting gentle ripples into the glassy surface. It wasn't a fancy boat, just something he'd owned for years, but it had always been reliable, trustworthy, safe. Behind him, Sarah Reynolds tucked the edge of a soft blue blanket around their 9-month-old son, Noah. The baby sat between her knees, wide-eyed, mesmerized by the shimmering water. Every so often, he let out a delighted squeal, flapping his tiny hands as if trying to grab the sunlight itself. At their feet lay 4 German shepherds. Max, the oldest, rested his chin on the edge of the boat, eyes scanning the horizon like a seasoned guard. Luna sat upright beside Sarah, ears twitching at every sound. Rex paced near the center, restless and alert. Shadow, the largest of them all, lay closest to Noah, his body angled protectively, as if the baby were the most important thing in the world. These dogs weren't just pets, they were family. They, grown up around Noah, slept near his crib, followed him from room to room as if it were their job to keep him safe. "This was a good idea," Sarah said softly, breathing in the fresh air. "He loves the water." Mark nodded. "Yeah, thought we all needed a break." The shoreline slowly shrank behind them, trees blending into a green blur. No other boats were nearby. No jet skis. No voices. Just the hum of the motor, the lap of water against metal, and Noah's quiet giggles. For a moment, life felt simple. Too simple. Shadow's ears twitched first. He lifted his head suddenly, muscles tightening beneath his dark fur. Max followed, rising to his feet and staring down at the floor of the boat. Rex froze mid-step, head tilting. Luna let out a low, uncertain whine. Mark didn't notice right away. He was busy adjusting the fishing rod, tightening the line, enjoying the stillness. Sarah was focused on Noah, laughing as he tried to shove the corner of his blanket into his mouth. Then came the sound. A sharp metallic crack. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong. Mark felt it more than he heard it. A vibration traveled up through the soles of his shoes, followed by a subtle shift beneath his feet. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her smile fading. Before Mark could answer, cold water splashed against his ankle. He looked down. For half a second, his brain refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. Water was pooling at the bottom of the boat. "Sarah," his voice came out slower than he meant it to, "stay calm." She looked down too. The color drained from her face instantly. The water wasn't rushing in yet. It was creeping, slipping through a thin crack in the hull, dark and steady, like something alive. Max barked sharply. Rex began packing faster, nails scraping against the metal floor. Luna pressed closer to Sarah. Shadow rose to his feet, standing directly in front of Noah, his body blocking the widening puddle. Mark dropped the fishing rod and reached for the radio. "Nothing." He tried again, still nothing. "Cell phone," Sarah whispered, already knowing the answer. Mark checked, no signal. The motor sputtered. Once. Twice. Then it coughed and went silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. The boat drifted sideways as a small wave slapped against it, sending another splash of water inside. This time it reached Mark's shin. "We're taking on water," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Okay, we'll handle this." But his heart was pounding too hard, too fast. The dogs could feel it. Rex began whining loudly, circling the boat. Luna barked toward the distant shoreline, her voice echoing uselessly across the empty lake. Max stood rigid, eyes locked on the rising water. Shadow didn't move. He simply stared at Noah, breathing slow and heavy as if anchoring himself to the moment. Sarah hugged her son tighter. "Noah," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's okay, baby." Another crack sounded beneath them, louder this time. Water rushed in faster now, swirling around their shoes, soaking the blanket. The boat dipped lower on one side, forcing everyone to shift their weight to stay balanced. Mark's mind raced. The shore was far, too far to swim carrying a baby. The dogs could swim, but panic could change everything. And the boat wasn't going to last. He looked at the 4 German shepherds. 4 strong bodies. 4 pairs of loyal eyes. And 1 tiny baby. A realization hit him so hard it stole his breath. There wasn't enough time. There wasn't enough space. There wasn't a way for everyone to survive if things kept going like this. The water reached Sarah's knees. Noah began to fuss, sensing the fear in her body. His soft sounds quickly turned into frightened cries. His face scrunched up, lips trembling as tears rolled down his cheeks. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife. Every dog froze. All 4 heads snapped toward the baby. The lake remained silent, the sky unchanged, the water kept rising. Mark swallowed hard, staring at his family, human and canine, trapped in the middle of open water with no help coming. And as Noah's cries echoed across the sinking boat, something shifted in the dog's eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but focus. Because whatever was about to happen next, they understood one thing clearly. The baby mattered more than anything else. The lake had gone from serene to treacherous in the span of seconds. Mark's hands shook as he tried to steady the boat. The aluminum hull creaked with every small shift of weight, sending shivers through the metal that made him wince. Water now lapped over the edges, cold and insistent, soaking the soles of his shoes. Each wave seemed determined to tip the boat farther, testing their balance. Sarah clutched Noah to her chest, rocking him gently in a vain attempt to calm him. His cries were loud now, sharp and urgent, piercing the still afternoon air. The baby's tiny fists pounded against her chest as if he knew, in some instinctive way, that danger had arrived. The dogs reacted immediately. Max's ears flattened. His tail stiffened. Luna barked, short, frantic, and high-pitched. Rex's packing became a frantic circle, nails squealing against the slick floor. Shadow's body went rigid, muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. The 4 of them moved with a kind of synchrony only years of training, loyalty, and sheer instinct could produce. Mark grabbed a paddle, trying to push against the water. It was useless. The current formed by the sinking boat worked against him. Each push only tilted the boat further, sending a wave of icy water crashing toward their knees. He glanced over the side and felt his stomach drop. The hull was warped, small cracks leaking like veins in metal. "We're going down," he muttered under his breath. Sarah's face paled. She tightened her hold on Noah, whispering, "It's okay, baby, we're okay," though her own voice quivered. She had always been calm under pressure, the kind of mother who never panicked, but this was different. This was primal. Rex barked suddenly, low and guttural, a sound that made the hairs on Mark's arms stand up. Max's eyes locked on the far shore, still too far to reach safely. Luna jumped to the edge of the boat and peered down at the water, as if calculating the odds of survival. Shadow stayed closest to Noah, nose twitching, ears flicking, eyes scanning every movement around them. Then it happened. The boat lurched violently. Mark stumbled, flailing for balance, and water surged across the floor, knocking him against Sarah. Noah cried out, terrified, as the blanket wrapped around him slipped partially into the water. Instinct kicked in. Sarah held the baby above her head, using every ounce of strength in her small frame to keep him dry. But the boat was sinking faster now. The bow dipped lower, water gurgling as it rushed over the sides. Small waves crashed into the hull, knocking everyone off balance. Mark tried the radio again. Dead. Cell phone. Dead. The last lines of defense, the last lifelines, were useless. The panic was contagious. Rex barked, packing faster. Luna's yaps cut through the air like knives. Max growled low, a warning and a question at the same time. Shadow growled too, but it was different. A protective growl aimed not at the water, not at the humans, but at the baby. Noah's cries reached a crescendo, a pure, desperate sound, and every dog froze, as if hearing a call that only they could understand. Mark tried to calm himself, and in turn, Sarah. "Stay calm," he shouted, though the words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. He looked down at the water, rising quickly, and realized with terror that the boat wouldn't float for long. Each second brought them closer to total submersion. The dogs reacted instinctively. Luna pressed against Sarah, her body tense but firm. Max moved to the center, eyes darting between the baby and the approaching danger. Rex barked again, frantic, packing, trying to figure out a plan that no one had taught him. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply lowered his body closer to Noah, standing guard as the water reached Sarah's thighs. Mark's mind raced. He had to make a decision. Do they jump into the water now? Could they swim all the way to shore with Noah in their arms? The thought made him dizzy. The dogs could swim, they were strong, but the baby couldn't. Then the boat shuddered again, louder this time. Mark looked up and saw the hull beginning to bend under the pressure of the water. Every crack, every groan of metal sent his heart pounding. The dogs reacted instantly. Max barked sharply, as if to say, "Get ready." Rex moved to the edge, ears forward, muscles tensed. Luna whined and pawed at the floor. Shadow's eyes never left Noah, who was now clinging to his mother with wet hair plastered to his forehead. Time slowed. The first wave of panic hit. Sarah screamed as the boat tilted dangerously. Mark lunged to grab her, but the water pulled at him. Noah screamed too, high-pitched and panicked. For a moment, Mark felt the unbearable truth. They might not make it. But then he saw it. Shadow nudged Noah's tiny foot with his nose. A gentle push, a signal, a reminder, we're not leaving him behind. It was as if the baby's cries had awakened something inside the dogs, a pure protective instinct. Their fear turned into focus. The chaos of the sinking boat didn't matter anymore. They formed a protective circle, bodies pressed close, fur slick and dripping. Max moved to the other side, forming a shield. Luna stayed near Sarah's side, steadying her. Rex barked, but this time it was purposeful, a warning to the water itself. Shadow remained closest, eyes locked on the baby, muscles coiled like springs. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had trained for emergencies before, boating drills, swimming practice. But this was beyond any training. The dogs had taken over, coordinating in ways he couldn't understand. They weren't panicking. They were preparing. The water now reached the midpoint of their legs. Waves slapped the sides of the boat, cold and unrelenting. Mark tried to stay calm. He scanned the horizon, calculating the distance to shore. Far. Too far to swim carrying a baby and relying solely on instinct. And yet the dog's coordinated behavior gave him a shred of hope. "Noah," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face, "please, baby, stay calm." The baby's eyes were wide, scared but also locked on Shadow. Something in the dog's gaze seemed to ground him, even as the world tilted and water surged. Noah's cries softened slightly, though the panic in the boat was far from over. Mark realized then that time was running out. Every second counted, every decision mattered, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the dogs, loyal, fearless, and instinctively protective, were already planning their next move. One more wave hit. The boat tilted violently. Water splashed over the side, soaking Sarah and Noah up to their shoulders. The metal hull groaned under the pressure. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm. "We have to move now," he said, voice steady but urgent. "We have to get to the water." The dogs reacted instantly. Max and Rex pressed toward the sides, ready to jump. Luna barked sharply. Shadow stayed low, bracing himself against Noah and Sarah. Mark's stomach twisted. Could they really do this? Could they jump into freezing water with a baby in their arms, relying on dogs to guide them to safety? A smaller wave crashed into the bow, tilting the boat further. Water rushed toward their knees, and then suddenly the entire bow dipped under. The boat began to sink. No one could move slowly now. Panic reached a new level. And in that moment, Noah did something extraordinary. He raised his tiny arms, reaching instinctively toward Shadow. Not toward the humans, not toward the shore, but toward the dog closest to him. Shadow responded instantly. His ears perked, his muscles tensed, and for the first time Mark felt a flicker of hope amid the terror. Because in the middle of a sinking boat, in the middle of open water, 4 German shepherds were about to do something no one could have predicted. And it all started with the baby's tiny hand. The boat was tipping faster, the water was rising, and the next moments would decide whether any of them made it out alive. The lake had transformed into a battlefield. The boat, once a quiet refuge, now rocked violently on waves that seemed to mock their desperation. Water surged over the aluminum sides, cold and merciless, soaking Mark and Sarah from their knees up. Every breath felt heavy, thick with fear. Noah cried again, tiny fists hammering against his mother's chest, and the sound cut through Mark's chest like a knife. He could see the cracks in the hull widening. One more tilt, one more wave, and the boat would collapse entirely. Mark glanced at the dogs. Max stood rigid, eyes fixed on the water, muscles coiled. Luna barked sharply, pawing at the slippery metal floor as if urging action. Rex circled the boat in a panic, and Shadow remained closest to Noah, his body a protective barrier. Every instinct in their being screamed, "Act now." Mark's mind raced, scrambling for options. We have to get into the water," he shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the waves. "We can't stay here." Sarah clutched Noah tighter, tears streaming down her face. "We can't swim that far," she cried. "He's too small, we can't." Mark swallowed hard, the impossible choice settling in. One wrong move and the baby could be swept away. The dogs could swim, yes, but could they manage all of them safely? Could anyone survive this? The water was rising rapidly now, sloshing over their thighs and splashing onto Noah's blanket. The aluminum hull groaned loudly, each creak a reminder that time was running out. "Mark," Sarah's voice trembled, "we can't." The boat tipped violently to the left, knocking her off balance. Mark lunged, catching her just in time, but Noah squirmed, crying out in fear. Max barked sharply, as if warning Mark to focus, to act, to make a choice before it was too late. Mark realized the decision had already been made. The dogs had taken over. Shadow nudged Noah's leg with his wet nose. The baby froze mid-cry, gripping the dog's fur. It was a small gesture, but Mark saw it for what it was, a lifeline. Shadow was communicating a simple truth: the baby would not be left behind. Rex barked again, frantic and loud, pawing at the edge of the boat. Max pressed against the side, ready to leap. Luna barked at Mark, eyes wide, urging him to act. Mark took a deep breath. There was no plan, no time to think, only instinct. He knew what he had to do, and yet the thought made his chest tighten with fear. We have to jump," he said to Sarah, voice shaking. "We carry Noah, the dogs, we follow them." Sarah's eyes widened. "What, are you insane? He's a baby, the water." But before she could finish, Shadow pressed closer to Noah, nudging him forward. It was almost like the dog was saying, "Trust me." Mark had no choice. He scooped Noah into his arms, holding him high above the rising water. Sarah grabbed his hand, her other arm around Shadow, who refused to move from Noah's side. Max and Rex braced at the sides, and Luna barked again, ready to leap. The first wave of water slammed over the boat, tilting it dangerously. The hull groaned loudly, metal bending under pressure. Mark's heart pounded as he assessed the distance to shore. It seemed impossibly far, but the dogs were determined. Their focus was unwavering. Mark's mind raced. Could they make it? Could 4 dogs really guide them across this expanse of icy water? There was no time to hesitate. "On my mark," Mark shouted, though the words felt meaningless against the roar of panic. "We jumped together." Shadow nudged Noah one last time. The baby clutched the dog's fur, his tiny fingers pressing desperately into the wet coat. The gesture seemed to steal the dog's resolve, and in a heartbeat, all 4 leapt. The boat lurched violently as the dogs hit the water, sending Mark and Sarah stumbling. Max and Rex plunged into the icy lake, paddling furiously. Luna followed, yapping in excitement and fear. Shadow stayed with Noah, keeping him high and stable, muscles straining against the current. Mark and Sarah plunged after them, water shocking their bodies. Noah's cries turned into muffled gurgles as he was held aloft, eyes wide with terror. The current tugged at them, cold and strong, trying to separate them from the protective circle of dogs. The boat groaned one final time, tilting sharply, and then it sank. Mark felt a pang of loss for the vessel that had carried them safely for so long, but there was no time to mourn. Survival demanded action. The dogs took charge immediately. Max and Rex swam alongside Mark, paddling with powerful strokes, keeping him balanced. Luna stayed close to Sarah, barking instructions, as if guiding her through each stroke. Shadow was a wall around Noah, keeping him afloat, steady and calm amidst the chaos. Mark gasped for air, the cold biting into his lungs. He could barely think, barely move, but he could see the determination in the dog's eyes. They were more than animals, they were guardians, heroes in fur coats. "Follow them," Mark shouted to Sarah, though his own voice sounded small against the roar of the lake. "Trust them." The current was relentless, pushing them further from the sinking boat. Mark felt the panic rising again. What if they didn't make it? What if the baby slipped? But Noah's tiny hands clung to Shadow, and the dog's eyes never left the path ahead. The instinct was clear: keep him safe, keep him alive. Mark realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. They were not in control anymore. The dogs were. And the dogs were determined to save them all. Every stroke was a battle against exhaustion. The cold seeped into their bones, the waves threatened to pull them under, and yet the dogs pushed forward unrelenting. Max barked sharply, guiding Mark's direction. Luna circled Sarah, nudging her forward with gentle taps of her snout. Rex swam with a ferocious determination, keeping the circle tight. Shadow kept Noah safe, moving in perfect synchronization with the others. Minutes felt like hours. Every second was agony, every second was hope. Mark glanced at Noah. The baby's cries had softened, replaced by wide-eyed wonder as he stared at Shadow's determined face. There was something miraculous in that gaze, a connection beyond words. And then Mark realized the truth. They might actually make it. But there was one problem. Shadow was still the only thing keeping Noah afloat, and the baby was tiny, fragile, and terrified. If anything happened to Shadow, everything would collapse. The lake didn't forgive mistakes. Mark's heart sank as a wave slammed into Shadow and Noah, tilting them dangerously. He reached out instinctively, trying to stabilize them, but the cold water made his fingers numb. Shadow paddled furiously, muscles straining, but even the strongest dog could tire. Mark swallowed hard. The impossible choice was clear. They had to rely completely on the dogs or risk losing Noah forever. He looked at Sarah, who was struggling but still moving, guided by Luna. "We trust them," he said, voice shaking. "We have no choice. We trust them." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We trust them," she echoed, clutching Luna's neck. The lake was a blur of water, cold, and desperate movement. Mark focused on Shadow and Noah. The baby's tiny fingers gripped the dog's fur with a strength that seemed impossible. Shadow's eyes met Mark's, and in that glance, Mark saw courage, determination, and an unshakable promise. "I will protect him, no matter what." And in that moment, Mark realized something profound. Sometimes, survival isn't about human strength. Sometimes it's about instinct, loyalty, love expressed through fur and muscle and unwavering devotion. The boat was gone, the shore was far, the water was relentless, and yet somehow with 4 dogs leading the way there was a chance, just a chance, that they would all make it. But one truth loomed over them, terrifying and unavoidable. Even with the dogs, even with their courage and strength, the water would not wait. Somehow, some way, someone was going to have to make a choice. And that choice would change everything. The lake was merciless. Cold water pressed against every inch of their bodies, biting through clothes, chilling them to the bone. Waves lapped hungrily at the small group, threatening to separate them. Mark's arms ached from paddling, Sarah's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and Noah's cries, high, urgent, and terrified, pierced the chaos like a siren. And then something extraordinary happened. Noah, small and fragile, did something no one expected. He lifted his tiny hand and reached toward Shadow, not toward Mark, not toward Sarah, not toward the other dogs struggling to keep them afloat. He reached directly toward the massive German shepherd holding him steady. It was instinctive, primal and beautiful all at once. Shadow, who had been tense and straining against the current, responded instantly. His eyes met the baby, and something changed. The fear that had gripped every living being in that sinking boat dissipated. Focus replaced panic. The other dogs noticed too. Max barked sharply, circling in the water as if signaling a plan. Luna paddled beside Sarah, her eyes wide but determined. Rex swam aggressively toward Mark, keeping the group together. Mark's heart nearly stopped. The baby's small, instinctive gesture had shifted the dynamics completely. It was as if Noah had tapped into something invisible, a signal only the dogs could understand. Shadow adjusted his body beneath Noah, forming a living platform. The baby's tiny fingers clutched the wet fur, and the dog's powerful legs churned through the icy water with renewed strength. For the first time since the disaster began, there was order in the chaos. Mark paddled closer, helping to keep the circle intact. "Good boy, all of you," he shouted, voice hoarse. He had never felt so helpless yet so inspired at the same time. Sarah, shivering violently, held onto Luna's neck, letting the dog guide her movements. Her arms ached and her legs were numb, but she could feel Luna's rhythm, Luna's unspoken instructions. The dog was literally saving them. The water was rising. Waves crashed over them again, cold and violent, threatening to separate the fragile circle. Mark felt a pang of despair as a particularly large wave knocked Noah sideways in Shadow's grip. But Shadow didn't falter. He paddled harder, adjusting his body instinctively, keeping the baby above water. Max and Rex flanked them, acting as shields against the relentless current, their barks sharp and purposeful. Luna stayed close to Sarah, guiding her with nudges and whines, her energy unrelenting despite exhaustion. Mark glanced at Noah's face. The baby had stopped crying just for a moment, but his eyes were wide, staring at Shadow. And in that gaze, Mark saw something he could never have predicted: comprehension, understanding. Even at 9 months, Noah seemed to recognize the heroism surrounding him. The wind picked up. The lake, which had moments ago seemed serene, now roared around them. Each wave threatened to engulf the group. Mark and Sarah struggled to keep balance, teeth chattering uncontrollably, lungs burning from the cold and effort. Mark realized something terrifying. Even with the dogs leading them, survival wasn't guaranteed. The water was too rough, the current too strong. They were still far from shore, and every second risked disaster. He had to make a decision, and fast. "Sarah," he shouted, shoving through the freezing water. "We need to keep moving toward the shore. Follow the dogs, they know where to go." Sarah nodded, her lips pale and chattering. She looked down at Noah, still clinging to Shadow, and whispered, "You can do this, little guy. Just hold on." The baby's hand squeezed Shadow's fur, and the dog seemed to respond to the strength of that tiny grip. Every muscle in Shadow's body tensed as he propelled them forward, slicing through the water like a small boat. Max and Rex swam alongside, shielding against rogue waves. Luna guided Sarah with relentless determination. It was a miracle unfolding in slow motion. Mark paddled with everything he had, keeping up with the dog's rhythm, but exhaustion was creeping in. His limbs felt like lead. Every breath burned. Every wave threatened to knock him under. And yet somehow they moved. Inch by inch, the shoreline crept closer, a hazy line of trees shimmering in the distance. Noah whimpered softly, not from fear now, but effort. He was small, fragile, and vulnerable, yet somehow pivotal. His instinctive gesture had united 4 dogs, 2 adults, and a baby into a single, coordinated effort. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Mark's mind raced, realizing the weight of the moment. A single misstep, a single lapse of focus, and the entire group could be swept away. And yet, the dogs refused to falter. A large wave crashed into the side of the group, separating Rex from Max for a brief moment. The current pulled Shadow slightly sideways, and Noah squealed in fear. Then Max barked sharply, diving toward Shadow to help stabilize the circle. Luna nudged Sarah, keeping her aligned with the group. Rex swam back, finding his place beside Max. Mark's chest tightened. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos, a miracle of instinct and devotion. The water was frigid, sapping strength with every stroke. Mark's arms screamed with fatigue. Sarah's body trembled violently, teeth chattering, muscles locked in cramps. And Noah's tiny hands still clung to Shadow, fingers digging into the dog's wet fur. Mark couldn't take his eyes off the baby. Every instinct told him to protect Noah at all costs, yet here was a dog doing the job better than any human could. Shadow had become more than a pet, more than a companion. He was a guardian, a lifeline. And then Mark saw it. The shoreline was closer. Not safe, not yet, but closer. But danger was still looming. A sudden gust of wind created a towering wave, one that threatened to break the fragile circle. Mark lunged to brace against it, but his limbs were heavy, numb with cold. Sarah's body shook violently as she paddled against the current. Noah's cries rose again, sharper and more urgent than before. Shadow reacted instantly. The dog twisted, adjusting his body, using every ounce of strength to shield the baby from the wave. Max and Rex formed a living barrier around them, bracing against the water. Luna barked instructions to Sarah, guiding her movements. Mark's heart swelled with awe. Every second, every instinct, every ounce of courage from these animals was keeping them alive. Noah's small hand pressed into Shadow's fur again, almost like a command, almost like a prayer. The dog responded immediately, muscles rippling, determination unwavering. The baby's instinct had become a beacon, a signal to 4 dogs and 2 humans that survival was possible. Mark realized the truth, terrifying and beautiful. The baby was not just a passenger. Noah had become the leader in the purest sense. His small gesture had unified them, directed them, saved them. The water surged again and the group tilted dangerously. Mark's arms ached beyond reason, but he forced himself to paddle to stay in rhythm. Sarah struggled beside him, fighting the waves, following Luna's guidance. Shadow adjusted beneath Noah, keeping him above the water, paddling with unrelenting strength. Max and Rex shielded them from rogue waves. The shore was still far, but hope had returned. Mark swallowed hard, realizing the miracle unfolding before him. The baby had acted instinctively, without fear, without hesitation, and that action had changed everything. But the lake was not finished with them yet. A large wave loomed ahead, dark and menacing, threatening to engulf them completely. Mark's heart raced. Noah clung to Shadow with all his strength, and the dogs braced for impact. Time slowed. Everything hung in the balance. The group was moments away from disaster or salvation. And in the center of it all, the baby's tiny hand remained clutching Shadow's fur, the most powerful act of courage any of them could have imagined. Whatever happened next would decide their fate. The water was unforgiving. Every wave crashed against the desperate group, splashing icy currents over shoulders, into mouths, and against the Bobby's shivering body. Mark's arms ached, muscles burning from paddling, but he barely noticed the pain anymore. His eyes were locked on Noah and the 4 dogs, the miraculous guardians holding them together in a chaotic living formation. Shadow, closest to the baby, had transformed into something beyond human comprehension. His body was low in the water, legs propelling with power that seemed to defy the cold and exhaustion. Every movement was precise, every paddle calculated. He adjusted constantly, compensating for the violent waves, using his own body as a buffer against the freezing lake. Max and Rex swam on either side of Shadow, muscles straining, tails cutting through the water, forming a protective corridor that deflected rogue waves and kept the baby upright. Luna stayed near Sarah, barking sharply and nudging her with her nose, guiding her movements, preventing her from slipping into the water. Mark could barely breathe, but he understood. The dogs were not just surviving, they were strategizing. "Follow them," Mark shouted, teeth chattering. "Just follow them." The group moved as one. Noah's tiny hands clutched Shadow's wet fur. His cries softened into whimpers of fear that somehow felt less desperate. The baby had become the axis around which the survival of 6 beings revolved. Then came the wave. A towering wall of water, dark and furious, rose behind them, threatening to engulf everything. Mark froze for a split second, panic clawing at his chest. Sarah's grip on Luna faltered, and Noah squealed as the wave lifted Shadow's body. But Shadow reacted instantly. With a powerful thrust of his legs, he dove beneath the wave, using his body to break its force before it could hit the group. Max and Rex adjusted their positions, paddling furiously, bracing against the water's assault. Luna barked continuously, guiding Sarah's hands and feet through the violent chop. Mark gasped as water splashed into his mouth, coughing violently. He had never seen anything like this. The dogs weren't panicking. They were calculating, acting as a single unit, instinctively responding to every threat in the water. Noah's tiny hand tightened around Shadow's fur, almost like a command. The dog's body flexed beneath him, muscles rippling with raw determination. The baby's gesture, so small and fragile, had sparked the dog's instincts into overdrive. Mark's mind reeled. He realized something terrifying and beautiful. The baby was controlling the situation without knowing it. Every action of Shadow, Max, Rex, and Luna was in direct response to Noah's presence and vulnerability. A second wave slammed into them, stronger than the first. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to steady her, but it was Shadow and the others who absorbed the impact. The dogs' bodies acted as living shields, keeping Noah above water, minimizing the force that reached the humans. The current was relentless, tugging at them, trying to pull them off course. Mark could feel the exhaustion pressing down on him, threatening to paralyze his limbs. Sarah's body trembled violently, lips blue from cold, but she kept moving, guided by Luna's nudges and barks. Then suddenly, Shadow made a decisive move. The dog twisted sharply, positioning his body beneath the sinking edge of the boat they had abandoned. He paddled with extraordinary strength, pressing upward against the boat's side. The effect was immediate. The boat tilted slightly, lifting them out of a small whirlpool of water that threatened to drag Noah under. Mark's jaw dropped. He had no idea dogs could do something like this. Shadow's instincts were extraordinary, so precise, so purposeful, it seemed almost human. The other dogs adjusted automatically. Max and Rex formed a V-shape ahead of the group, guiding them toward calmer water. Luna stayed with Sarah, positioning herself to counter any rogue waves. Every move was instinctive, coordinated, and life-saving. Noah's cries subsided into soft coos of concentration, tiny hands still gripping Shadow's fur. The baby had become the center of a living, breathing safety net, a pivot around which instincts, loyalty, and survival converged. Mark's mind raced. The shoreline was closer now, but still far enough that exhaustion was a real threat. If the dogs faltered, if Noah slipped, the water would claim them all. Every second mattered. And then came the breaking point. Another massive wave surged from the lake, taller than any before. Mark's arms shook violently as he paddled, fear clawing at his chest. Sarah gasped for air, teeth chattering uncontrollably. The baby's cries rose sharply as the wave lifted Shadow's body, tilting the dog and Noah dangerously. It felt as if time had slowed. Every heart was beating in sync with the lake, with the waves, with the dog's instinctive movements. Shadow adjusted instantly. He twisted, paddling furiously, using his body to absorb the impact of the wave. Max and Rex pressed against him, creating a wall of strength and stability. Luna barked, guiding Sarah's hand, ensuring she didn't lose balance. Mark felt tears sting his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. These dogs were not just acting on instinct. They were actively strategizing, responding to each other, and saving the baby in a way no human could. The baby's hand tightened on Shadow's fur again, small fingers digging in. That gesture, so simple, had sparked an extraordinary chain reaction. The dog's instincts, their loyalty, and their protective drive had aligned perfectly to keep Noah alive. Mark swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of awe and terror. Every wave could be their last. Every second could tip the balance. And yet, against all odds, they were moving forward, inch by inch, toward salvation. The shoreline was faintly visible now, a narrow line of trees shimmering in the distance, tauntingly close yet impossibly far. Mark forced himself to keep paddling, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Sarah's body trembled violently, but Luna's guidance kept her upright. Then came a moment of perfect alignment. Shadow positioned himself directly beneath Noah, Max and Rex flanking him, Luna beside Sarah. The group moved as one, a single unit against the cold, the waves, and the lake's relentless pull. Every instinct, every ounce of strength, every beat of loyalty had converged into a coordinated effort. Mark gasped, exhausted beyond measure. He could barely keep his arms moving, but he didn't stop. Sarah's shivering body followed Luna's nudges, keeping her in rhythm. Noah's hand remained firmly on Shadow, tiny fingers gripping with extraordinary strength. Mark realized the truth, and it hit him like lightning. The baby had saved them all, not by swimming, not by shouting, not by thinking, but by simply reaching out. That instinctive gesture had sparked the courage and strategy in 4 extraordinary dogs. The lake raged around them, but hope had returned. For the first time since the disaster began, Mark dared to believe they might actually make it. But danger was still ahead. A massive wave loomed ahead, dark and threatening. The group approached it, hearts pounding, muscles straining. Every instinct, every ounce of strength would be tested. And at the center of it all, clinging to Shadow, was a baby whose tiny action had changed the course of survival. The moment of truth was almost upon them. The shoreline shimmered in the distance, a thin line of green and brown that felt tantalizingly close and impossibly far all at once. The lake, however, had no mercy left to offer. Every wave now seemed to have its own mind, towering higher than the last, cold and furious, slapping the group with the force of a living entity. Mark's arms were trembling uncontrollably, each paddle stroke burning, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't, not with Noah in Shadow's grip, not with Sarah clinging to Luna, not with 4 extraordinary dogs orchestrating this fragile lifeline. Noah's cries had softened, but his tiny body shook violently from the cold. His hands were still wrapped around Shadow's wet fur, holding on with more strength than Mark thought possible. Shadow's body flexed and strained beneath him, paddling furiously, adjusting to each wave, each surge, each shifting current. Max and Rex flanked Shadow, pressing forward, powerful muscles cutting through the icy water like oars in human hands. Luna stayed by Sarah, barking instructions, nudging her every few seconds to keep her balance, her own muscles screaming from exhaustion. Mark swallowed hard. They were close, but the lake had one final challenge left. A massive wave loomed ahead. It rose like a dark wall, the crest curling violently, its white froth whipped by the wind into sharp, splintering sprays. It wasn't just a wave, it was a test of survival. One wrong stroke, one hesitation, and it could break their fragile formation, sending Noah, Shadow, and the others underwater in a heartbeat. Mark's chest tightened. His teeth chattered, his arms shook, and yet he forced himself to move. "Hold on," he shouted to Sarah, though his voice was barely audible above the roaring wind and splashing waves. "Hold on tight." Sarah's pale face was streaked with tears, teeth chattering uncontrollably, but her hands clutched Luna's neck with desperate determination. Noah whimpered, tiny hands gripping Shadow's fur as if the dog was the only anchor in the world that mattered. The wave surged closer, and time slowed. Every heartbeat seemed like a second stretched into eternity. Shadow reacted before Mark could even think. With an explosive burst of power, the dog twisted beneath Noah, diving slightly downward to hit the base of the wave. Max and Rex adjusted their angle instantly, pressing against the water, stabilizing Shadow's position. Luna barked sharply, guiding Sarah's movements, keeping her in rhythm with the dog's effort. Mark felt his stomach drop as the wave crashed over them. Cold, forceful water slammed into his chest and back, knocking him sideways. Sarah screamed, clutching Luna as the wind tore at her hair. Noah's cry cut through the chaos, sharp and terrified, but Shadow held firm. The dog's muscles rippled as he paddled, using every ounce of strength, every instinct, every fiber of loyalty to counter the wave's power. Max and Rex pressed against the current, flanking them like guardians. Luna barked continuously, nudging Sarah with perfect timing. Mark gasped, fighting to keep his arms moving. Every stroke felt heavier than the last, but the sight of Noah clinging to Shadow drove him onward. The baby's small hands were tiny yet commanding, sparking an unrelenting drive in 4 extraordinary dogs and 2 exhausted humans. The wave slammed again, taller, more violent, threatening to engulf them completely. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he saw the water lift Shadow and Noah dangerously, tilting the baby sideways. But Shadow, with strength that seemed almost superhuman, twisted his body, pressing against the surge, keeping Noah stable. The dog's eyes met Mark's for a brief second, a silent communication of reassurance and determination. "I've got him. I won't fail." Max and Rex adjusted, forming a barrier against rogue currents. Luna barked, guiding Sarah, keeping her close, synchronized with Shadow's movements. Mark paddled harder than he ever had in his life, muscles screaming, lungs burning, knowing that every second counted. The shoreline was closer now, trees and rocks slowly growing sharper, more tangible, but the lake was relentless. Every step of progress required the combined strength of humans and dogs alike. One misstep, one faltering paw or stroke, could mean disaster. Mark glanced at Noah. The baby's eyes were wide but focused, lips trembling, small hands gripping Shadow's fur like it was a lifeline, because it was. Shadow paddled with precision, adjusting for every wave, anticipating every ripple, protecting Noah with everything he had. And then it happened. A rogue wave, larger than any before, struck the group sideways. Mark was thrown off balance, splashing violently into the icy water. Sarah shrieked as the wave slammed against her, almost tipping her into the churning depths. Noah squealed, tiny body rocking precariously atop Shadow. Mark froze for a heartbeat, panic clawing at his chest. But Shadow did not. The dog twisted sharply beneath the baby, muscles coiling and releasing like springs. Max and Rex adjusted instantly, flanking the dog to counter the current. Luna barked instructions, nudging Sarah forward. Every instinct, every ounce of experience and loyalty in 4 remarkable dogs aligned perfectly in this single moment of life-or-death precision. Mark felt his heart race uncontrollably. He realized something extraordinary. Shadow, guided by the baby's instinctive clutch and the other dog's cooperation, had turned the tide. Noah remained safe, balanced atop a living fortress of fur and muscle. The wave passed. The group stabilized. Noah whimpered softly but did not cry. He understood somehow that Shadow had him. Mark's chest heaved. Sarah's teeth chattered, but she let out a shuddering breath. The shoreline was tantalizingly closer, the first real taste of hope they had felt in hours. But there was no time to relax. The lake remained volatile. The current pulled at them, waves still lashed against their bodies, and the cold sapped every ounce of energy. Mark and Sarah paddled with every muscle left, following the dog's lead. Shadow kept Noah safe in the center, muscles taut, paddling relentlessly. Max and Rex created a moving shield, countering the worst of the lake's fury. Luna guided Sarah, keeping her upright and in rhythm with the others. Mark's mind raced. The baby's instinct, so small, had become the axis of survival. Every move of the dogs depended on Noah's presence, every coordinated action spurred by the tiny hand gripping Shadow's fur. Without that gesture, they might have succumbed to panic, exhaustion, and the lake's relentless power. The shoreline drew closer, but danger was still present. A jagged cluster of rocks threatened to pierce the water nearby. One misstep and a leg, a paw, a tiny baby hand could be crushed. Mark yelled, left, rocks ahead. Shadow adjusted, paddling with incredible strength, veering just enough to avoid disaster. Max and Rex followed, nudging the group safely through the shallow rocks. Luna barked, guiding Sarah around the hazards. Mark felt a surge of awe so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. These dogs were not just loyal, they were heroes. And the baby had orchestrated it all without knowing it. Noah's cries had transformed into quiet whimpers of concentration. He was small, fragile, and yet powerful beyond comprehension. His instinctive gesture had sparked the miracle keeping them alive. Every stroke, every paddle, every coordinated effort was bringing them closer. The shoreline was now just a short swim away. Trees shimmered like emeralds, rocks glistened under the sun, and for the first time, Mark allowed himself to imagine safety. But the lake's final challenge was still ahead, a strong current pulling toward a deep channel. One last effort, one last push. Mark looked at Shadow. The dog's eyes locked on Noah, muscles rippling, determination unwavering. Max and Rex pressed close. Luna barked encouragement. Mark swallowed hard. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice nearly drowned by the wind. "We're almost there, just a little more." The group surged forward. Every stroke, every paw, every ounce of strength was synchronized. The current fought them, the waves crashed, the cold bit into them. But the bond between humans, dogs, and baby had forged a force stronger than any natural threat. Mark gasped, feeling the shore under his feet. Sarah followed, guided by Luna. Shadow paddled with one final burst of power, keeping Noah safe. Max and Rex flanked them, shielding against the last rogue waves. And then they reached it. The shoreline. The solid, immovable, safe land. Mark collapsed onto the mud, shivering violently, exhausted beyond belief. Sarah dropped beside him, holding Noah close. The baby's tiny hand still gripped Shadow's fur, but he was safe. Alive. Shadow staggered onto the shore, fur matted, teeth chattering, but his eyes never left Noah. Max and Rex shook themselves, water spraying everywhere, then settled near the baby. Luna barked once, then sat beside Sarah, tongue lolling, tail wagging weakly. Mark looked at the baby, then the dogs, then back at the lake that had almost claimed them all. Tears burned his eyes. They had survived. Because 4 dogs, instinct, and one tiny baby had refused to let nature win, the shoreline felt unreal. Mud squished beneath Mark's boots, cold and clinging, yet it was solid. He sank to his knees, gasping for air, chest heaving violently from exhaustion and relief. Sarah dropped beside him, pulling Noah close against her chest. The baby's tiny body shivered uncontrollably, but he was alive. Alive because of Shadow and the others, and something far beyond ordinary courage. The dogs remained close, bodies low, muscles taut even on solid ground. Shadow stayed with Noah, nostrils flaring, ears alert, eyes scanning the tree line. Max and Rex flanked the group, still on high alert, while Luna pressed against Sarah, her fur matted with water and mud. They were soaked, trembling, but every movement was deliberate, protective, almost reverent. Mark's mind raced, replaying every moment of the lake's chaos. How had they survived? How had the baby, fragile and tiny, triggered a chain reaction of instinct and coordination that kept them alive? And then he heard it. The faint, almost impossible sound of a motor. In the distance, down the narrow dirt path that led to the lake, a small fishing boat approached. A man, older, weathered and alert, had spotted something unusual in the water. A group of 4 German shepherds paddling in perfect formation, guiding 2 humans and a baby toward shore. The man had seen dogs swim before, but never like this, never with this purpose, never like they were orchestrating a rescue. By the time the boat reached the muddy bank, Mark and Sarah were exhausted, shivering violently, barely able to lift Noah from Shadow's protective stance. The man jumped out, tossing ropes to secure the small craft. "Are you all okay?" he shouted, eyes wide as he took in the 4 soaked, trembling dogs and the 2 humans clinging to life. Mark could only nod, tears blurring his vision. "He, the baby, the dogs, they saved us," he whispered, voice hoarse. They brought us here." The man's eyes widened. "The dogs." Shadow remained low, refusing to release Noah even as Mark gently lifted the baby into his arms. The tiny child had clung to the dog through the entire ordeal, trusting him more than anyone else. Mark held Noah close, feeling the rapid, terrified heartbeat slow with each breath, until finally the baby's lips curled into a small, exhausted smile. Sarah collapsed beside Mark, holding him tightly, shivering uncontrollably. "I can't believe it," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't believe it." Max and Rex shook themselves violently, water spraying everywhere, but they never left Shadow's side. Luna remained beside Sarah, tongue lolling, tail wagging weakly but steadily. The 4 dogs had done more than survive. They had guided 2 adults and a baby through freezing, unpredictable water to solid ground. The fisherman on the boat shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot in my life, but I've never seen anything like this. That's a miracle." Mark nodded, too exhausted to speak fully. His hands were shaking violently as he stroked Shadow's wet fur. The dog leaned into him, eyes dark and intense, unyielding. There was no pride in Shadow's gaze, only focus on the baby, on safety, on the group. The man helped Mark and Sarah onto the boat. As they settled, still shivering, the dogs followed willingly, keeping close to Noah. Max, Rex, Luna, and Shadow remained vigilant, scanning the shoreline and water, ready for any threat. Mark cradled Noah against his chest, feeling the warmth of the baby's small body seep into his own freezing frame. He could hardly comprehend what had just happened. 4 dogs, acting in perfect synchrony, had saved their family. As the boat cut through the water back toward safety, the fisherman finally spoke. "You need to get warm, you need help, but I've never seen dogs do anything like that. You should call someone, news maybe, but be careful. People won't believe it." Mark shook his head. "It doesn't matter if they believe it," he said softly. "We know the truth, and we owe everything to them." He gestured to Shadow, Max, Rex, and Luna, still standing protectively around Noah. The baby, still shivering, lifted his tiny hand toward Shadow again. The dog responded instantly, nudging the baby gently with his nose. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous weight. Noah had survived, and not just survived, but had somehow inspired 4 animals to become heroes. By the time they reached the dock near their car, emergency crews had already arrived. People were shouting, lights flashing, blankets being thrown, and voices calling for towels and warmth. But all Mark could see were the dogs, still vigilant, still protective, still focused on Noah. A paramedic reached for the baby. "Is he okay?" she asked. Mark nodded, holding Noah tightly. "Yes, thanks to them," he said, his voice cracking. "4 dogs, they saved him." The paramedic's eyes widened. "Saved him? 4 dogs?" "Yes," Mark said, pointing to the soaked, exhausted, heroic animals. "They wouldn't let him sink. They led us through the water. They didn't stop." Shadow nudged Noah gently as if confirming the story. Max, Rex, and Luna remained close, tails low but steady, scanning the crowd. They didn't move until the baby was safely wrapped in blankets. Then, and only then, did they allow themselves to shake the water from their fur and settle on the dock. Mark knelt beside Shadow, placing his hands on the dog's wet shoulders. "You did it," he whispered. "You kept him safe. You saved him. You saved all of us." Shadow's ears twitched. He pressed his wet nose into Mark's hands, not in pride but in acknowledgement. Sarah hugged Noah, tears streaming freely. "I can't believe it," she said, voice trembling. "I don't think I'll ever stop thanking them." The fisherman watched from his boat, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been on this lake for 40 years. Never seen anything like that. Those dogs, they were heroes, pure heroes." Word of the incident spread quickly. Neighbors, reporters, and locals arrived, some skeptical, some awestruck. Everyone wanted to see the dogs that had performed what no human could, what no ordinary dog could. But for Mark and Sarah, it wasn't about the attention. It was about the miracle that had unfolded before their eyes. A baby, instinctive and fearless, whose tiny gesture had triggered 4 incredible dogs to act in perfect coordination, protecting life in a way that defied reason. Noah's hand reached out again, pressing gently into Shadow's fur. The dog leaned into the touch, ears flicking, eyes dark and steady. Mark felt a lump in his throat. Shadow, Max, Rex, and Luna had become more than pets. They were saviors, guardians, heroes in the purest sense. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mark realized something profound. Life had tested them all, pushing every instinct, every bond, every ounce of courage to the limit. And yet, through the chaos, through the fear, through the icy water, they had survived. Because sometimes, survival isn't about human strength. It's about instinct, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a baby and 4 extraordinary dogs. Mark looked at the baby, then at the dogs, and finally at the lake. A shiver ran through him, not from the cold but from awe. They had faced the impossible and lived. And in that moment, everyone present understood something powerful. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. The baby reached out once more, tiny fingers brushing Shadow's wet fur. The dog pressed closer, as if to say, "You're safe now." And for the first time in hours, Mark, Sarah, and Noah allowed themselves to believe it. The nightmare was over. But the miracle, that would never be forgotten. The aftermath of the rescue felt surreal. News crews swarmed the dock, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, but Mark barely noticed. Sarah clutched Noah to her chest, still shivering, and the baby's tiny fingers stroked Shadow's soaked fur, a connection that had carried them through the impossible. The 4 dogs sat vigilantly around them, fur matted, bodies trembling from exhaustion and cold, yet eyes sharp and alert. Shadow, closest to Noah, refused to leave his side. Max and Rex formed a protective line, scanning every movement around them, while Luna rested her head lightly on Sarah's knee, tail wagging weakly but steadily. For the first time since the lake claimed their boat, Mark allowed himself to breathe. The media had arrived, cameras capturing every soaked, shivering, and heroic detail. Neighbors and local volunteers gathered, murmurs of disbelief and awe spreading through the crowd. People whispered about the courage of the baby and the instinct of the dogs. Some shook their heads in skepticism. Some cried. But Mark didn't need anyone to believe him. He had seen it all with his own eyes. The baby had acted instinctively, lifting his tiny hand toward Shadow at the moment of crisis. That small gesture had sparked a miracle. 4 dogs working together with precision, loyalty, and courage no human could have orchestrated, navigating waves, cold, and exhaustion to bring a family to safety. Paramedics wrapped Noah in blankets, checking him carefully, and the baby cooed softly, his little hand instinctively brushing Shadow's fur again. The dog leaned into the gesture, nuzzling gently, as if reaffirming their bond. Mark knelt beside Shadow, resting a hand on the dog's wet shoulder. "You saved him," he whispered, voice cracking. "You saved all of us." Shadow's dark eyes met his, unwavering calm, as though saying it was never a choice. "He needed me." Sarah hugged Noah tightly, shivering but smiling through tears. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered to Shadow. "You're more than a hero, you're everything." The crowd around them had grown silent, watching the quiet exchange between humans and dogs that no words could fully capture. A neighbor stepped forward, camera in hand. "People need to know about this," she said, her voice trembling. This is incredible. It's a miracle." Mark shook his head, smiling faintly. "It's not about miracles, it's about them." He gestured toward the 4 dogs, wet, shivering, exhausted, but alive and alert. "These are the real heroes. Everything else was just following their lead." In the days that followed, the story spread across social media, local news, and eventually national headlines. Videos captured shaky, heroic footage of Shadow paddling with Noah on his back, Max and Rex forming a living barrier, and Luna guiding Sarah to safety. The public was captivated, moved to tears, inspired. Memes, posts, and articles shared the story as the miracle baby and the 4 German shepherds who saved him. But for Mark, Sarah, and Noah, it wasn't about fame. It was about a bond forged in the icy water of near death, a connection between a baby and 4 extraordinary dogs that could never be replicated. Noah's instinctive gesture, small, unassuming, yet filled with pure courage, had been the spark. Shadow's protective devotion had been the engine. Max, Rex, and Luna had been the shield, and together they had achieved the impossible. Days later at home, the family sat wrapped in blankets. Noah's tiny hands reached again for Shadow, who lay protectively beside him. Max and Rex rested close by, ears twitching at every noise, while Luna leaned against Sarah's leg, eyes half closed but alert. Mark watched the scene, heart swelling. He realized something profound. The bonds they had forged on that lake could never be broken. The dogs had saved a life, yes, but they had saved something even more intangible, the sense of trust, love, and instinctive loyalty that defines the truest of heroes. The story of the rescue sparked conversations nationwide about the intelligence, loyalty, and courage of dogs. Trainers, scientists, and enthusiasts weighed in on how instinct could guide animals to perform beyond what humans thought possible. Social media exploded with messages of hope and inspiration. Yet no video, no post, no article could fully capture the emotional weight of what had transpired. Only those who had lived it, the family, and the 4 heroic dogs, truly knew. Months later, the lake was calm again. The sun reflected peacefully on its surface, a stark contrast to the chaos that had almost claimed them. Mark, Sarah, Noah, and the dogs returned for a quiet visit, not for cameras or attention, but to honor the place where lives had been saved. Noah toddled alongside Shadow, tiny hands reaching for the dog's fur with the same trust that had saved him. Max and Rex ran ahead, tails wagging, while Luna trotted beside Sarah, nudging her gently when she lagged behind. The water shimmered, calm, serene, and forgiving, a silent witness to the courage, instinct, and unbreakable bond that had conquered it all. Mark knelt beside Shadow once more, placing his hand on the dog's shoulder. "You'll never know how much you saved today," he whispered. Shadow nudged Noah gently, ears flicking. It was all the acknowledgement he needed. Sarah smiled, watching her child interact with the dogs that had saved him. "I think he knows," she said softly. "I think he knows who his heroes are." Noah clapped his tiny hands, squealing with joy as Shadow rolled over slightly to allow the baby to pat his wet fur. The moment was simple, pure, and filled with unspoken understanding. Life had given them a second chance, and they had survived because instinct, courage, and love had guided them. As the family turned to leave the lake, Mark looked back at the shimmering water one last time. The waves seemed gentle now, almost respectful, as if acknowledging the bond between the baby and the 4 dogs who had defied nature itself. He realized that some stories don't need embellishment. Some heroes don't wear uniforms. Some miracles aren't accidents. They are the result of instinct, courage, and unwavering loyalty. Noah's tiny hands had sparked a miracle. Shadow's muscles and mind had executed it flawlessly. Max, Rex, and Luna had protected, guided, and ensured it succeeded. And now, as they walked away from the water, wrapped in blankets and the warmth of love and relief, Mark, Sarah, and Noah knew one truth above all else. Heroes come in many forms. Some walk on 2 legs, some walk on 4. Some have fur and instinct, and they will protect you no matter what. The world would never forget. And neither would they. Shadow nudged Noah gently as the sun dipped behind the trees. Max, Rex, and Luna flanked the family, tails wagging weakly but proudly. Noah laughed, tiny giggles breaking the quiet evening air, reaching for the 4 dogs who had changed his life forever. Mark smiled, Sarah hugged Noah close, and the 4 dogs, soaked, exhausted, and heroic, walked with them into the evening, forever more than pets. They were heroes. They were family. And their story would live forever.